welcome to the latest episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. I am one of your hosts, Eric Prado, and joining me today, as always, is Cecily Nelson. Cecily, how's it going?
Everything is good. We're rounding out summer, so I think that's bittersweet for me. I'm
Yes.
not quite ready for fall, but I am embracing the weather change, and happy to be into September.
Well, Cecily, we have a great episode coming up with, it's actually a special episode. Envoy Global CEO and President Dick Burke sat down and chatted with Anupam Singhal, the CEO and President of Worldwide ERC or WERC, one of the largest, groups for talent mobility professionals and experts. But Cecily, before we hop, chat a little bit about that and preview it, I just wanted to just kind of catch up a little bit, see how your end of summer is going. We are recording this the first week of September. So yeah, fall's right around the corner.
It is. It's crazy to think how quickly it goes. And it's funny, both Eric and I are based in Chicago, and the winters never seem to go this quickly. So I think
Yeah.
that's a kind of a little bit of a curse, but we'll take it. But everything's going well. I know, Eric, you know this, but I'm getting married next weekend. So that's kind of been a big thing on my to-do list of getting all of the preparations done for that. So excited that that's right around the corner and will kind of be a great transition for me into fall after that.
Very exciting times. Congrats again on the upcoming big day. It's a very exciting time and a giant party. So,
Yeah.
what more can you ask for?
I know exactly. How about you rounding into fall? How has that been for you?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've been recovering from a second bout with COVID, so my Labor Day weekend or all of the prior weeks since we are recording this early in the first week of September was sick and recovering. So I'm looking forward to just kind of getting back out there and seeing some friends I haven't seen in a while, things like that. And we got the start of football. Football's back, so I have no idea if the camera is able to show it, but I got like a little thing back there that says like "Go Bears." So very excited to for the start of the football season this Sunday. Yeah.
I know.
But I'm a fall person too. I love the fall, so I'm just looking forward to being able to throw on some hoodies and
Yes, sweater
relaxing.
weather is upon us.
Sweater weather. Yes, yes. Well, speaking of sweater weather, I tend to enjoy some podcasts while listening to them outside, and I do find podcasts and sweater weather go pretty well. So, Cecily, just wanted to kind of preview this episode, special episode between Dick Burke and Anupam. We did record this in late July, early August, if I recall, or they recorded late July, early August. And it was just super interesting to kind of, listen to two CEOs just kind of talk about their experiences. Both of them have backgrounds, kind of leading startups and growing organizations, the highs, the mids, the lows, etc. But I'm curious to hear kind of what your takeaways from their conversation was, and any highlights that we might be able to give our listeners up front before they hop into the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think overall, this was a really great conversation where two dynamic leaders who are really focused on strategic growth in the mobility space discuss the use of technology in the industry, the need for talent, which that kind of seems to be a theme for some of our recent conversations on the podcast, is that need for talent, upscaling, and then how important continuing education is in the ever evolving industry of immigration and mobility. I think those were the few key topics that really stood out for me in this conversation. And it was really great to get DB and Anupam's perspective on each of these topics that are really prevalent in our day to day, but also for those individuals who are directly involved in the immigration and mobility space, and how that impacts their program on a daily basis. I think this conversation will be really useful to those individuals.
Totally agree. And I think too, to your point, they did talk about the growing importance of corporate immigration and that need for talent. And WERC's big event, GWS, is coming up in October in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And I do recall Anupam. I'm not sure if it was in the episode or when I was chatting with him beforehand, saying that corporate immigration, there are a lot. It is a hot topic, and it will be a hot topic in this upcoming fall event. So uh, definitely, he provides some good insights on that. Cecily, anything else that you would add before we transition into that conversation?
No, I think that covers it. I definitely think the event in October will be packed with great knowledge, and that some of that continuing education piece is live. So I think that for any of our listeners who are curious, that's a great time to kind of immerse yourself in an event and into the industry a little bit further.
Well said. Well said. And with that, here is Dick Burke's conversation with Anupam Singhal, CEO and president of WERC.
Hello, and thanks for joining the latest episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. Dick Burke, CEO of Envoy Global. Delighted you're with us today, and really particularly delighted about today's guest, Anupam Singhal. If you're listening to this, you're obviously involved in mobility, and I suspect you already know who Anupam is. But Anupam is the relatively recently named head of WERC. Delighted to have him with us today. We're going to cover what WERC is up to, trade some stories about trying to grow businesses in the mobility space. So we're going to look backwards. We're also going to look forwards. So again, thank you for joining us today. And Anupam, in particular, thank you for joining me today. Lovely to have you. Tell me, for folks who don't know your story, maybe you really bring an amazing background. And I think so many people in the mobility space are excited about what you're going to do for mobility and for WERC in particular. Give us the Anupam backstory. I mean, it's a really amazing credentials you bring to the job.
Nice to be with you. Thanks for having me on your podcast, I guess, video podcast for this episode. Anyways, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, and I'm looking forward to this one. And I'll try to keep up with you. So hopefully I can hang in there. But
you'll be just fine, Anupam. I'm confident.
Well, let's see. You can judge me at the end of this. But by way of background. Look, I trained, I started my career as an investment professional. I trained as a private equity investor in technology companies globally. I worked with relatively high growth businesses, typically in and around technology at a couple of different private equity firms based in New York and London and emerging markets like India and such. And the hallmark of all of my experiences was that I actually lived and worked in a lot of different places. So I moved around quite a bit, not only in terms of relocation, but also in terms of assignments and being out in, for example, the UK for 2 years from New York as an expat and such. And I didn't even know these terms at the time, relocation, assignment, and these things were not like defined terms to me. Because I was just an ordinary frontline employee that was just going around doing what needed done. And the teams, I assumed, were ensuring that I had the appropriate visas and tax compliance and all of that stuff taken care of. And, it turned out that in one of my experiences when I was in the UK for 2 years, my wife had stayed back in Boston. And so I did a 2-year transatlantic commute with her. So I had technically a domicile in one place and a residency in another place. And I was earning my income by way of working in different places and spending time in emerging markets and so on and so forth. And unbeknownst to me, the entire time, basically getting myself trapped into a pretty wild web of compliance nightmares along the way.
Right.
And that all came to bear at a certain point, sort of came crashing down altogether and really made for a very painful and expensive experience, both for me and my employer. And that stuck with me and led to eventually me very foolishly leaving my private equity gig to risk becoming a broke entrepreneur and actually going through that journey with my co-founder to start a company called Moneo that used location data analytics to help with compliance automation in the context of business travel, extended business travel, et cetera, and then was basically out of the box ready for remote work compliance. And, that was a journey in and of itself. We built that. Very fortunately, great team and scale that business. We largely bootstrapped it and, a great set of customers, and we were growing the business quite nicely and started to see an early convergence in the area of mobility between business travel and traditional types of mobility. And in 2020, combined the business with combined Moneo with Topia, with the vision that Topia had to basically create, or Topia and Moneo shared to create a comprehensive end-to-end talent mobility platform. And so that essentially is, by way of background, if you were to distill it down, an investor, operator, that's largely what describes me, with an interest in and around technology, but trained over time, school of hard knocks in compliance and mobility and such.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I want to get to WERC, but a couple observations. I didn't know the backstory from Moneo. I, as you know, was always a huge admirer of Moneo. I thought it was incredible technology with a very strong use case behind it. So congratulations on building it. Second is an observation. We need more people like you, Anupam. It seems like all the smart kids these days get into finance and stay in finance. And my older boy is doing that, and I'm incredibly proud of him. But it's a shame that we don't have more people doing what you did. I can't really say I did what you did because I didn't have such a fancy background. I started out as a lawyer.
Come on.
I'm telling you, but we need the Anupams and Nishants to get out of PE and get into building companies. So I laud you on that. Before we get to WRC, two things in the story you just recounted are two things we think a lot about at Envoy, and you'll have a really unique perspective. One is convergence, and the other is the role of private investment in service-heavy businesses. I'd love to get your observation on both of those. Let's do the first one first. We at Envoy believe that this convergence is going to continue. Mobility departments are being stretched for dollars. There is what used to be the travel department and the HR department have now fused into one. The line between immigration and business travel has blurred with COVID. And as a result, we very much think that there's going to be convergence. Obviously, the CIBT Newland Chase was probably first to it with their, brother-sister offering. But do you see that continuing? And before I hear your answer, it's interesting. Just today, Envoy is releasing its first ever EMEA immigration trend survey. We've done U.S. surveys for 9 years in a row. Get 400 to 500 HR professionals, and they're really very, very helpful reports. We're very proud of this new report covering EMEA. We've got over 1,000 HR professionals contributing to it. You can find it on envoyglobal.com. But one of the big things that came through was a belief in convergence. Practitioners, the majority of practitioners saying they want a singular solution for immigration, for business visas, and for mobility tax. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, do you think this is a flash in the pan? Is this a consequence of all the success or noise Vialto's making? It stands to me to be a logical response, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on convergence generally.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really interesting times. I mean, there's a lot of pretty sizable fundamental trends that are playing out in our industry, broadly defined global talent mobility industry. The one around convergence. So I have my personal observations and biases from pre-WERC, but what I'll share with you, and we can expand on it more when you get to the WERC questions. I've been on an active listening and engagement tour since I started my tenure as president and CEO of WERC in around March. And at this point, I've now had the privilege and pleasure of connecting with and speaking with, at some level, with well north of 2,500 people around the world in our industry, in and around our industry. So, and a lot of them include corporate mobility folks. What's interesting is, yeah, you're exactly right, that what we saw happen at Moneo and then Topia was this increasing convergence from a business perspective. Because if you think about the employee, right, which, this was observations personally I had. When I moved over to the UK from New York for the 2-year assignment, right, it wasn't like I was an assignee and that was it. No, I went over to the UK and my business travel shot through the roof. I was every week somewhere in continental Europe. I was coming back to New York, flying through Boston to see my wife. My night and weekend job was figuring out an entry strategy for my company in emerging markets like India and sub-Saharan Africa. So I was traveling there a lot. Business travel was just the other side of the coin. That was me. So I was an assignee and I was business traveling actively. And so I had a UK work authorization, right? But then there was all these business visas that were needed for me to conduct business as I just described. And so ultimately it's the same sort of employee. It's your same talent that needs all those services. I think the big distinction has been is that there were different people that have been responsible for the functions, right? Global mobility has largely sat under HR.
Right.
And then business travel has largely been managed by travel managers that will typically sit in finance,
right?
Typically under the AP organization, accounts payables organization, procurement organization. And so that has meant historically that they've been disconnected. They've been two separate sort of worlds. But we started to see that convergence happen because when you talk about compliance, you talk about a duty of care perspective from global talent mobility. I mean, if I'm the C-level executive at a company, and I ask like, hey, my VP is in trouble because there's a border ban that's just gone into effect, and how are we making sure that they're coming back because they're in XYZ country or wherever they might be? Well, you're typically going to go to the department whose name is Global Talent Mobility or Mobility, right?
Right.
You're not going to think of going to any other department. And that's where increasingly what I've seen and I've heard from our corporate mobility colleagues is that they get pulled in for a variety of different reasons, whether it's compliance oriented, tax immigration, et cetera, or it's, it can be like a risk from a permanent establishment perspective, or it's simply duty of care, security, safety perspective, the accounting of where people are and where they need to be. So ensuring, the way I think about the mobility function is really what it's meant to do is to make sure it helps a company get right people to the right place at the right time and keep accountability around them. Right.
Yeah.
So if you think about it that way, which increasingly I'm hearing our corporate colleagues say that they're getting pulled into these things that were traditionally within the remit of business travel managers. That convergence is definitely happening. Now, the one tricky thing that I'll tell you, and it's not a secret, is, I really feel for our corporate colleagues, corporate mobility colleagues, because they're being pulled into these things with no additional resources being allocated to them. In fact, in most cases, resources are being trimmed down further.
That's right.
Right. And they're being asked to take on more responsibility. And we haven't even talked about remote work. We haven't even talked about remote hybrid work, the return to office, and all of the compliance policy issues that is opening up. So, there's a lot that's going on, and it'll be interesting to see how long it takes for it to play out. The convergence, as I see it, is undeniable because it ultimately impacts the same employee.
I'm glad to hear that. We very much believe in that as well. Do you think it will extend to the mobility tax as well?
It's interesting, and I'd be curious to hear what you found in your survey that you just alluded to a little earlier. But I think, again, tax and immigration are two flavors of compliance for the same behavior.
Getting the right person in the right place at the right time in a compliant manner. Tax is part and parcel, as is work authorization. That's our piece. Yeah.
Right. And so what happens is with tax, I mean, the one difference between tax and immigration is tax, there's not a criminal liability typically, unless it's fraudulent behavior.
Right.
Simple non-compliance, I shouldn't call it simple. Non-compliance does not immediately equal criminal offenses.
That's right.
Whereas on immigration, for most countries, flouting immigration laws is considered criminal at some level. And so with that being one possible difference, hopefully in your favor, in the favor of your peers in the immigration services space, it's equally painful because it's often much more expensive in dollars, non-compliance, or even trying to comply, right? So the tax problem, while not having the criminality associated with it in quite the same way, has very big dollars associated with it. And, ultimately, if you think about where the risk will be biggest, it's with your senior most and most valuable executives and employees. And those are typically higher compensated. And so the tax exposures being created as a result of their behaviors and activities are quite considerable.
That's right.
And so there is that convergence I've seen play out, again, through my time with Mineo and then even in the short time with WERC.
Right on. And plus the reputational damage, particularly if it is a senior person, because then
absolutely.
People will conflate that person with the almost, mens rea, so to speak, from one entity to the company and the individual to the entity, and it gets hairy in a hurry. I want to go back to something you said, which we very much see both in our survey, our EMEA survey. One of the other big findings beyond this convergence was the desire of the mobility professional on the corporate side for knowledge, for help, because of the fact that they haven't been trained in immigration. Sherm has done some interesting work showing that of the 14 different disciplines that an HR professional has to deal with, usually mobility is the last one that gets attention, and the one deemed least interesting to the newbie. And so I do think there's certainly a request from the mobility professionals early in their career for training and for their third-party vendor to be that. And we had the luck, or I'd love to say it's wisdom, to change our name to Envoy years ago. And Envoy is someone who, your emissary overseas or your guide in a foreign land. People are looking for that. Where does that fall on your hit list of things at WERC to try to help educate the corporate members around these developments? Obviously, immigration is near and dear to our heart, but we've so many times someone said, "Hey, listen, this just got thrown on my lap. I don't understand this alphabet soup of different visa types. Help me." And it's been a really great entree point for us. But how you thinking about that in your new capacity?
Two things. One, I'll say the bottom line first. It's funny you asked me that. What I'll say to your audience is, stay tuned. Come to GWS and you'll be ready for some announcements we'll make there. But
just let me give the shameless plug on that. GWS will be outside Washington, D.C. in October. We're going to be there. Envoy is going to be a sponsor. It's one of those must-do events. Give everyone the dates and location and where to sign up on it.
You should go to the WRC website, worldwideerc.org, and follow the link to GWS, Global Workforce Symposium 24. It's outside of DC, as Dick, you just said, in the National Harbor at the Gaylord. It's 22nd through 25th. And it's really exciting programming. But we'll be making a whole series of announcements of all the things that have been going on at WRC just in the last 6 months that we've been doing. And so to your question specifically, Dick, from my perspective, education is actually the top priority for WERC.
Great.
Really upping our game in the area of helping our members in the community get better educated in a variety of different ways, further boosting and enhancing their foundational knowledge within our industry, but then having pathways to be able to specialize in specific areas within mobility. Mobility is not one thing. It's a compilation of a number of different sort of functions and activities coming together. And so create pathways for specialization in specific areas, And then, there's going to be a big emphasis on helping with upskilling and reskilling. So the upskilling is the second part that I talked about in terms of specialization, but reskilling as well, because what we haven't even started to talk about is the role technology is playing in our world at large, and specifically the implications for the talent mobility industry with increasing role of technology in there. There's going to be disruption. Let there be no doubts about that.
Yeah.
There's going to be quite a bit of disruption, and so I consider it an important responsibility for your trade association to be supporting that sort of reskilling and redeployment of talent within our industry.
Great news to hear, because there is such a pervasive need for this. It's a dynamic space. All of the elections, go from India all the way to the United States this year. Things are very, very fluid. And lay on top of that the fact that so many people who get into mobility don't come with a deep experience. I think I'm delighted to hear that. Another thing that came out of the survey, it was very interesting comparing the results of our EMEA survey just released to our U.S. Much more awareness in EMEA. And I'm curious to hear how you think about this and how this, if at all, informs your agenda at WRC. Loud and clear in the EMEA survey, the demographic pressures driving the need for immigration, that principally Western Europe, industrialized Europe, very, very conscious of that they're below the birth rate replacement rate, and a need for immigration to deliver sufficient labor. We never hear that in our U.S. surveys. And I'm curious, in this listening tour, 2,500 people, have you been able to discern any differences in terms of how folks perceive the need for immigration? U.S., it's always, listen, we got a short-term need. We don't have enough STEM talent in the U.S. It was quite interesting how loud and clear it came through a broader demographic reality in Western Europe about we just need more workers, period. Are you hearing that? And if so, how does that impact how you think about another component, perhaps, of WRC's mandate around advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So not quite, I would say, based on everything that I've heard, and we're planning on doing more data-driven analysis in this area over the next 12 months. But based on all the conversations that I've had and everything that I've heard, actually, yes, you're right. In Europe, and I would say even in APAC, different countries in APAC have different trends. But there's a much more pronounced sort of need for bringing in talent from elsewhere, not quite as pronounced in the US. Yeah. And reading between the lines, what I pick up is that, in the US, we've had the benefit of having had a vibrant sort of immigration backdrop, right? Where we've always been open to attracting talent from around the world, and that has fueled so much of our innovation and growth over time. I don't know if it's an implicit or tacit expectation that will continue in some ways, even despite the tightening of quotas and rhetoric to the contrary that has gone on through the political circles. I don't know if it is that or it is that U.S. companies are not afraid of extending their footprints into foreign markets and staffing their operations with locals in foreign markets, right? So it's a combination of a few things that I think it translates into the U.S.-based folks not being quite as sort of drive or moving towards a place of, maybe desperation is too strong a word, but like this urgency of, hey, we need fix
more
our
workers.
talent situation, bring people from outside because of the demographic shift. So I think that's at play. What I will tell you though is it's remarkable of Europe. Not surprised at all that that's what you're finding. It's consistent with what I've picked up from my tour, but I'm not surprised at all that you're finding the companies there are quite focused on this demographic shift and the need to bring talent from elsewhere. is because historically they've not really had as much immigration, right? Fueling it, and they do have that demographic deficit that's building up, and it's going to be a problem for
Right.
them, especially when you are faced with an environment following COVID, lockdowns, etc., supply chain disruptions, and political,
That's right.
socio-political, geopolitical environment, where a greater need for self-reliance and onshoring of activities, whether it's manufacturing or what else you might have. I think that's driving. It's not surprising that Europe, you're seeing that come back. What was surprising to me was when in our India summit, and even in the APAC summit in Singapore, there was those markets are growing so fast,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
companies that are scaling at like staggering rates,
Yeah.
where they're just looking for talent anywhere they can find it. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of repatriation that India is looking at
India in
doing,
particular.
so is China and other countries around there, repatriating talent from the West, whether it's the
Yeah.
US or parts of Europe, that may have naturalized and or not in many cases, bringing them back into the country, into their respective countries, and then also attracting new talent that not part of the Chinese diaspora or the Indian diaspora, but attracting foreigners into roles in bigger ways. So there's quite a bit of activity going on, not for the demographic reason quite so much, at least not in India's case, but just from a growth perspective that's playing out in other parts. And then, companies, some of the biggest companies looking to diversify their supply chain manufacturing bases outside of China, and extending their footprints into other Southeast Asian countries and so on. They're obviously, whenever you look to do that, you take talent over from your biggest centers of excellence, happens to be US and Europe, and those people going out there and, on assignment or relocating or what have you. So it's exciting times, where one thing that I've learned over the last 6 months is to not paint the world with one brush in terms of the trends that are playing out.
Yeah, well, thank you for all of that. I think there's going to be a very interesting. It's already ongoing. We see it in our daily work and in our surveying. Almost these two tectonic plates. I visualize it as, Anupam. You've got the political plate of, we'll call it nativism, and you've got the demographic plate pushing the other direction. And it's going to be interesting to see how they reconcile. And look at what's going on. I love going to India. We've got a big office in Hyderabad at Envoy, over 200 people, and the energy there and the way India is going to benefit, I think, because of Western companies seeking to get out of China and get into India, deemed safer politically, and also just the growth of the Indian economy. It's really fascinating times. Let me ask you another one of these bigger, sort of high-level questions. It's something we think about. And I trust with your background, you're uniquely situated and capable to think about it. One of the things that really struck me, my background is I started out as a lawyer, realized I like growing businesses more, was lucky to get to apartments.com very early, ended up running that business and we sold it. And some of the themes there were utilizing technology to find an apartment versus the old-fashioned way. And we tried to bring that into mobility, principally in immigration. And what's been interesting to me is when you talk to the financiers, if I talked to Anupam 10 years ago, everyone was looking for a SaaS product. And the relative failure in mobility of SaaS relative to service. And in the world of AI and world of just technology spread, how do we leverage in our industry, Anupam, all the technology has to offer in a world where so much of almost all of the TAM is on the service side, and so much of the service is delivered by entities that don't have access to institutional money? I just wonder whether it's putting us into this sort of doom loop where mobility, notwithstanding the constant prattle for more digitization and more tech, because of the ownership structures, we're not going to get there. And it's going to leave a uh, it's going to be to all of our detriment, including societies. I mean, do you think I'm off on a crazy tangent there? I think there's really something there that all the time, a few times Envoy's tried to have a SaaS product. People say, God, I love it. I just don't have the money. The mobility professional has the money for the service. They don't have it for the SaaS. And I wonder if that's creating a loop where we're not investing in tech as much as we could. And companies with cool products are failing because all the money's on the service part of the TAM and there's no SaaS TAM.
Oh. Yeah, it is. I think it's a really interesting question, and that's a topic that, that we could probably spend a good few hours talking about, because I obviously have thought about it a lot and dug into it a lot. But at the highest level, I've had a lot of conversations now with leaders of various businesses within our mobility industry, like yourself. But across different verticals, whether it's RMCs, whether it's DSPs or corporate housing and so on. It's an interesting time, as we were saying earlier, for many, many reasons. And one of the realities that's at play is there is this increasing desire on businesses and corporations' part to have better, they may not be demanding technology in and of itself, but fundamentally requiring more technology because of the need for data security, data controls, more analysis, and understanding of your own operations, driving efficiency within those operations. All those things require your service partners, to have better technology. Otherwise, it's really hard to do. It's very, very, very difficult to do. But at the same time, most players in our space, exactly to your point, are not in a position where they can make that kind of investment. Why?
Right.
Because one, margins are not fat at the moment, right? They're, in fact, if anything, quite challenged.
Contracting.
Cost of businesses doing business is high. Revenue, there's pressures on, which basically compresses your margins. At the same time as your cost of capital is the highest it's been in like 10, 15 years.
That's right.
Right? And so it's not like you've got frivolous cash sitting around, and it's not like you can get cash at any kind of money was free for the longest time, for about a decade. You don't have that.
And on top of that, bad stew is the other ingredient, it seems to me, that so many of the service providers either can't or won't take institutional money. So there's this additional capital constraint on top of it.
Correct.
Right? And so it leads to this lethargy, stasis in our evolution. I wonder what the way out of the woods is. I'm cheering for Vialto, frankly, and that Vialto is helping Envoy, hopefully to another extent, normalize this role of private institutional money with service driving evolution. But we'll see if it'll take root.
Yeah, I think I do have a point of view on that, and I could be completely wrong, but I do think because of how complex and complicated our industry is, again, mobility is not one thing, right? It's not one service provider. It's not one function. It's not one service line. It is a whole series of things that have to come together, get coordinated to actually make it happen, right? Getting the right place, the right people to the right place in the right time takes a village to make happen, right? By way of service capabilities. That complexity, I think will never, or not never, I shouldn't say never. It actually calls for some level of human involvement, right? More so than many other processes that have gotten automated through pure software over the last couple of decades, or even longer, 3 decades or so, right? There is a greater need for coordination, at least at this time and for the foreseeable future, right? At some point, you could potentially say that, look, the coordination function across all these service lines, that should be automated, can be automated. A lot of the service delivery itself should be automated, can be automated. Yes, but I mean, don't lose. For as long as we have people in the workforce, for as long as we have employees who are the talent that is engaging in mobility, we're going to have a need for people to help provide the service to them that helps them engage in that mobility.
I am thrilled to have the guy from Harvard Business School saying that because we deeply believe in it. It almost seems like a paradox, but we think it's true that as tech advances, automation advances, AI, OCR, RPA, alphabet soup, we think one of the interesting and perhaps counterintuitive byproducts is to underscore the centrality of the service element. That I think, and I've said to people at Envoy, we tout our AI. I think at some point it's going to be like a hospital saying we've got a great X-ray machine. It's going to become expected. And what distinguishes healthcare isn't who's got the good X-ray machine; it's the person operating it on the service side. So I think there's a need for us to, in our space, to think like business people, leverage technology, but the byproduct to that, of my mind, one of those byproducts will be an underscoring of the centrality of the service professional, who will be able to be even more adept and consultative and proactive and strategic, because she is no longer having to deal with all the crap taken off her plate by virtue of the tech.
Right. That's right. It's basically leveraging tech to elevate the quality and the efficiency, cost effectiveness of your service. Right.
And so so that the human element of creativity and empathy, those things can come through, having had the lower end stuff be taken care of.
Look, even if you look for parallels, which I do often, right, as a student of business and student of software and tech, investing and so on, you look at adjacent industries. Even you don't even have to go that far if you stick within HR, HCMs, human capital management systems, or ERPs. For every dollar of software that is sold by those industries, there's $10 of services that are attached to it, on average. Right, like that. And the HCM industry and ERP.
What do you count in the $10? I hate to interrupt you, but that's an amazing statistic. I want to make sure I understand it. I understand the dollar of tech. What's the other $10? These implementation costs, or the labor working it, or what?
There's a lot of no. This is external cost. So it's a lot of it is implementation. It's process design, process implementation. Because keep in mind, technology, if you're not thoughtful about what your process is and what this technology is going to play as a role within that process, ultimately it's the process. Well, you're gonna just destroy value. And I've seen this repeatedly where tech implementations will happen without enough thought and planning having gone into it, and they're essentially 3-year, 4-year white elephant situations that just become untenable and total destruction of equity value of a company, right? And so so it takes the form of implementation, process design, and then oftentimes managed services around the software itself. Because especially if you think about US, again, it varies from market to market, in my opinion. Europe has stricter labor laws, so it's harder to sort of, your workforce is not quite as variable, but in the US it certainly is. And so it's much easier for a US operation to say, okay, I can scale my team and capability by relying on outside resources by way of consultants, than necessarily have to build that capability out internally, unless I view it as a core competency, right? And that's the whole logic behind outsourcing that set in 30 years ago. And I'm not talking about offshoring, I'm talking about outsourcing. You outsource something that's non-core to you, but it's something that's important, and you need it done efficiently. So that sort of model, again, it varies from market to market, and companies behave differently, and operations will behave differently. But on the whole, I don't see a lock, stock, and barrel elimination of people-based services. It is going to change. The competencies are going to have to change. The skills needed are going to have to change. The role people play will change. Exactly what they're doing will evolve. But it's not like a mass elimination of people, at least not. I'm not going to put a year duration on it, but I will say at least not in my horizon, as I see it from a business planning perspective.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Anupam. I had not heard that number around HCM, and that's helpful to know, because I don't see any move away from the dollars in our space, moving materially away from the service side. And I didn't know. I mean, we're not alone. I don't know if our ratio is 10 to 1, but really very, very, very interesting.
The more complex the software is, the more service dollars get associated with it. So if you look at Workday, look at SAP, look at all the big HCMs and ERPs, they are not the biggest money makers off of their own software. The consulting firms are. The IT services firms are the biggest money makers off of their software.
Fascinating. You've got a day job. I want to make sure to let you get back to your day job. We've got only a few minutes left. We touched on the big WERC event coming up outside Washington in October. Other things you can tease or announce or point people to, perhaps the regional events, the overseas events. What should people know about?
Yeah, a couple of things, and there's a lot that we don't have enough time to actually go through the laundry list, but I'd love to unpack it for folks over time. I'll share a lot of updates at GWS itself, but we have the LATAM Summit coming up in Sao Paulo in Brazil in mid-September. That was a big hit last year. Saw tremendous attendance and participation. There was actually a very sizable number. I forget exactly how many, but I think more than half the attendee population was corporate mobility people. And this year it's looking like it's going to be even higher than that. So that's one that's coming up in the LATAM region. There's a survey study, that research analysis that's been done that will get shared back out during that event with the audience there. And GWS this year it's the 60th anniversary for WERC. So, and that is our flagship global event annually. This one is going to be nothing like anything that has preceded it. There is so much innovation that we're packing in there. There's so much change in how education gets delivered, how network gets facilitated, how public policy will get pushed forward. So as examples, there's an advocacy day on the front end of the conference that people can sign up to, where WERC is setting up meetings with various committees in Congress to actually go visit with them and help them understand how various laws and policies are impacting our industry, and how that squares with the value that our industry creates. There is an immigration summit. You talked about how timely and complicated immigration is and how top of mind it is for everybody. Yep. There's an immigration summit on the back end of the conference on the Friday first half, where that is a deep dive into immigration. There's labs and workshop sessions and all kinds of other really cool educational formats that are being implemented. And of course, there's going to be a party because it's the 60th birthday. So, and a lot more going in there. There's a lot that is happening by way of education, public policy, and so on. The last thing I'll say is get involved, right? Anyone in the industry that has ever cared about this industry and your own success within this landscape, this is your association. WERC is for you, and it can be even more valuable for you by you and your involvement. So roll up your sleeves, get involved, jump in, provide feedback, provide support. And we have, I think, 10 to 12 different committees and policy forums, all staffed with volunteers that are helping provide guidance to WERC on the execution roadmap. And, I think in total, we have well over 300 to 400 volunteers that are playing a leadership role across these committees and policy forums to really define the work plan of WERC. So we're really taking it back to the people and empowering people to really get much more in control of their futures, their presents and futures.
Thank you, and fantastic. And I say thank you because if you're listening to this, you're involved in mobility. We need a powerful, reinvigorated WERC, and exciting for exactly that reason. That I feel, I've been in the space now for 10 years. I come to a different background in technology, and prior to that, law. I was so focused on building Envoy, and now we're getting to a scale, 9 figures of revenue and 8 figures of profitability and 700 people, that I want to get more involved in the industry. And I feel so much better about it because of your leadership and the sense you bring to it and the wisdom you bring to it and the business chops and entrepreneurialism and innovation you bring to it. So I'm really glad you're at WRC, and I hope others join me in playing a much more active role in supporting and lending a hand or a voice any way we can. So
that's very humbling. Ultimately, I view myself as a product of everyone around me. So the progress that I'm able to make or not make is really a function of the folks around me. So I'm a big believer in investing in others' success, and through that, this collective and my success that gets achieved. So that's how my objective and success metric is really making this association work for this industry, both in terms of supporting it in the first instance, and second, providing leadership with the dynamism and the sort of disruption that our industry is going through in sort of an unprecedented way. Provide that sort of leadership to it, and those are my success metrics. And if we can make it happen, that nothing will make me happier than that. But really, that is a function of folks like you and many others rolling up their sleeves and getting involved and saying, "Yeah, we want to make this happen. Let's make it happen."
I'll take the over on you hitting your metrics, Anupam. Anyway, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me, Anupam. Look forward to seeing you in DC or outside DC in October. And thanks all of you for tuning in to the latest edition of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. I'm your host, Dick Burke, CEO Envoy Global. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.